Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'finu v'yamcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh nachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeimcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lamdei Toratecha lishma Baruch atah nam l'mei Torah l'mo Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay. So we're on page, get it up there, 9b1. And I'm just going to do a summary quickly. So we just did a quick summary that we wanted to learn one of Rav Huna's teachings brought by Rav Zeira. And he said that you have to give a third of, you have to spend a third on a mitzvah. So what does that mean? We clearly say that if there are 3 mitzvahs that comes up, it doesn't mean he blows his entire estate. So what does it mean? It actually means you can spend up to a third extra to make a mitzvah mahuda, meaning to beautification of the mitzvah, which is a mitzvah in and of itself. And we asked, how is this third calculated? Rav Ashi asked of Rav Huna, is it a third reckoned from the inside or third reckoned from the outside? So we sent summary notes, but just quickly, inside means that, say, an average pair of tefillin in the Jerusalem marketplace from shop to shop is 6 zuz. Then what you do is you divide that by 3, which will give you 2 zuz, and then you add the 2 zuz to the primary total, which would be 6 zuz for an average pair, and that would give you 8 zuz in total. So therefore, you're paying 1/3 extra from the amount of 6, which is equaling 8, to beautify the mitzvah. Then there's the opinion, do you reckon it from the outside? So how do we work it out from the outside? So despite the text that I gave you, there's an easier way. We know in our head that if you take 9 zuz, 2/3 of it are 6 zuz, which is the rate of an average pair of tefillin, and therefore 2/3 is the average rate, and 1/3, being 3 zuz, is the extra beautification. So that is taken from the principal amount, but to get to that principal amount, it's actually half, not a third of that base amount, meaning you take 6 zuz, you divide it by 2, you get 3 zuz, and then you times it by 3, so then you get 9 zuz. So that's the bottom line. So we say, how does it actually work in reality? The Shulchan Aruch, according to Rashi, paskins that it's good enough to have the total in this case from the inside, which would be the 8 zuz. Okay. So unable to resolve this inquiry, the Gemara concludes, let the question stand. Another teaching regarding this extra third. In the West, they said in the name of Rav Zeira. So when they used the word in the West, these were people in Babylon, and in the West referred to Jerusalem. So the rabbis of the West said in the name of Rav Zeira, up to a third must come from a person's own resources. From there on onwards, if one spends more than a third extra, the balance will come from the Holy One, blessed is He. So what it's actually saying is, there was a cap put on it that you could spend up to a third extra to beautify the mitzvah. But if you want to spend more, the balance will come from the Holy One, blessed be He. So what does that mean? That means if you either come into a windfall of money that was unexpected, alternatively, you're so wealthy that it's not going to dent you in any manner. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, good.
Yes, it
so
does.
That's where we're ending. And guys, I want to wish you a Yeshar Kayach. Do you know what you've all achieved now? We are hitting the second Mishnah. It's taken us 2 months. We started on the 21st of April, but some of you guys started a few days later than others, but you've all done the first daf. And you have people in shul that read between, between Mincha and Mariv. They'll read a Mishnah, and I'm not knocking it at all. And they'll read da-da-da-da-da-da, next Mishnah, da-da-da-da-da. And they don't realize that you can spend 2 months on one Mishnah, and we haven't even gone through it in detail. But bearing in mind, we've only done the Schottenstein, with commentaries from the Schottenstein. It could take you years just to do a Mishnah. But I think our pace is good. We're getting a nice degree of detail. We're getting a nice degree of pace. I think it's working, and I'm just very, very proud of each and every one of you. And the thought that you put into your questions, and the fact that you don't let me get away with the fact that you might not understand something. And you stop me and you say, I don't understand. I want clarity. I'm looking for a little bit more depth here. And I appreciate it from you guys. You must never think that I roll my eyes up and think, what now? On the contrary, I think maybe there's a viewpoint I haven't heard. Maybe there's something I don't know. And you push me up. As they say, you sharpen my sword. So I want to thank every one of you very, very much for this. So Yeshakaya.
And likewise, Damon, we want to thank, I'll speak on behalf of the group, I hope I can, if no one minds, but you've done an amazing job. And the way you present it and the detail and all the sources and all the rabbis and all the clarity that you bring to every single shiur is absolutely unbelievable. I think you're doing an amazing job, and I just wish we continue doing this for many years to come.
Amen. And you know what? On Zoom, we actually save ourselves half the daf time in travel. You must know this. To get from any point A to B and back any point to any bay, you waste 20 minutes driving there, 20 minutes driving back. That's the length of a shiur.
Damn, so it's 9,000 Ks for me.
Okay, it's a little bit more than 20 minutes. If we teleport, maybe. I haven't worked out how to teleport. But I mean, Arthur, you know, when I was staying in Gilor and I'd go to Midrash Shmuel to learn with...
at least half an hour.
At least a half an hour. And sometimes more because I'd get lost. But that's... so my sense of direction isn't so good. So guys, Zoom has been a very, very practical endeavor. And I've enjoyed seeing your faces every day. It's been therapy for me during lockdown. And that's why, as I said to Arthur a few minutes ago, I really miss seeing you guys. Physically. Sorry.
And please, God, we'll see Kevin's face one day.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you.
You know, Dave, Zoom is a perfect name for this app because we zoom into the meeting. It's like, Zoom, you're there.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And we zoom in terms of magnify each and every issue. It's an appropriate name. So I just want to share my screen with 1 second just to show you guys something before we hit the Mishnah. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Okay, so I'm going to just share the screen and I want to, hang on a sec. I don't know whose phone's making a slight beeping noise. Not sure.
It's mine.
No problem. If you can put it on silent, that would be cool. All right, I just want to share a screen. All right, guys, I don't know if you can see what this is here. This is the oldest record. No, close. It does look like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So basically, this is the oldest Mishnah that they found in existence. In those days, they didn't have the Gutenberg press, so each person would write a Mishnah, and they would know it properly. So this was found near the Sea of Galilee, and it's reckoned to be. They found it. They reckon it for sure is 1,300 years old, but they probably say it precedes that by another 400 years. So it's about 1,700 years old.
Wow.
So that is absolutely incredible. So what we're learning is not, as some people say, some doctored form which the rabbis invented. These are issues that guys, whose phone is that keeps beeping?
It's not a phone. Sometimes, because I'm on WhatsApp.
Okay. You're on WhatsApp on the computer. No problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can't stop that beep. I get it.
Yes, I'll go mute.
No. You don't have to go on mute, Michael. You don't have to go on mute. It sounds like a bomb went off on my side because your sound is so good. So, guys, all I wanted you to do is share this picture for you as an appreciation of showing you actually how old this is and how many years people have been dealing with these sort of issues. Okay, so well done. All right.
Is that all handwritten?
Of course.
Yeah.
You can see the different
It
sizes.
It looks like little towels. It looks like little towels there. If you look at the paper, what I'm seeing is like, but that might be the cracks.
So I don't know if it's actually on parchment or it's on tiles. I think Arthur's right. I think it looks here as though it seems like it's segmented into little bricks or little stones or something. I don't know, but it's a copy of a Mishnah and I need to get the history of it. Anyway, guys, I want to thank you very, very much for that. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, and then we're going to get now to the actual daf. So I'm going to read the Mishnah for you. Okay. So the Mishnah states as follows. The Mishnah describes the circumstances under which one is liable for damage done by his property. So it goes like this. Whatever I'm obligated to guard from doing damage, I have caused the damage it does if I fail to guard it properly. Therefore, I'm liable to pay for that damage. If I caused a portion of his damage, I'm obligated in the payment of his damage, like one who caused all his damage. One is obligated to pay for damage only in the case of properties that are not subject to the law of Me'ilah, properties that belong to members of the covenant, and privately held properties. And in these circumstances, one is liable for damage done in any place, except for premises that is reserved exclusively for the damager, and on the premises belonging to both the damaged party and the damager. Okay, we're going on to 9b2. And the last line says, when one of the damagers does damage, the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land. Okay, so we're going to examine this Mishnah piece by piece. And remember, we spent 2 months examining the first one, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of issues. When it starts off and it says, whatever I'm obligated to guard from doing damage, okay, what does that actually mean? So what does that mean is it constitutes 3 things. That which I caused personally, that which I created, like for example, a hazard such as a pit that has the potential for doing damage, or that which I own. Okay, that's according to Rashi and the Erie. Now, we then hit a separate part and says, I have caused the damage it does if I fail to guard it properly. Therefore, I'm liable for that damage. Do you remember we learned about the 4 shomrim, guardians, custodians? When the custodian was a paid custodian, an unpaid custodian, a borrower, and a renter. So what we learned from there very clearly with Rav Oshaya and Rav Chisda is that if it's in your care, even if you don't cause it physical damage, but it's damaged as a result of your negligence or failure to guard it properly, it's as if you damaged it. You are responsible to pay for that damage. And we're going to go through it more in depth, but we did touch on it before. Now, there's the next statement. If I caused a portion of his damage, I'm obligated in the payment of his damage, like one who causes all of his damage. So we're going to just tackle that. It's a very, very complicated issue when we hit that. But while it says one who caused only part of the damage incurs full liability, as if he caused the entire damage, we're going to discuss this in the 10th daf in Aleph and Bet. And it's going to discuss cases that are subject to this particular sort of rule. Okay? But I just want to give you something to think about. It's obviously not talking in a case where if you damaged a certain part of the item, and then that part costs X amount, and the entire item costs Y amount, and Y being a heavy, heavy price, and that small part of that object is small and can be inexpensively replaced, you obviously don't in that case have to pay for the entire article. So we're going to see what does this mean. But what it means is firstly a mindset to turn around and say, oh, it's a cosmetic damage. It's only a flesh wound. So for example, if you go past and you scratch somebody's car, right? And the guy says to you, you need to pay. You can say, listen, pal, I haven't affected the motor mechanics of your car, your auto electronics. That's fine. It's got a slight scratch on. You can hardly notice it. So in that case, the person is still obligated to pay for the damage they caused. Just because they didn't render that object useless does not mean they're not subject to pay as if they made the entire object useless. Because we're not saying you pay for the entire object. We're saying just like if you render the whole object useless, there's nothing to talk about, you pay. So too, when it's only cosmetic damage or something small, you still have to pay the portion that you damaged. Does that make sense, guys? This is looking to obligate people that are trying to worm their way out of things. Okay, so we're also saying that sometimes you can damage a piece of property that actually is what you call what do you call it? The final hammer blow. That's a different term where it's completion of an object or it renders the object useless. Meaning that, say, for example, you borrow somebody's laptop. Let's just say you borrow somebody's laptop. And for some reason, you wipe, you damage them, you slightly drop it or whatever, and you damage their motherboard, okay? And that particular motherboard is now rendered obsolete, okay? In that particular case, that laptop is useless. Now, yes, if that part is available and you can replace that motherboard and the motherboard maybe costs 1,000 Rand or 600 Rand out of a $6,000 laptop, you say, fine, you replace it and you fix it, nothing to talk about. But if that is rendered obsolete, you still rendered that object obsolete, even by mere virtue of the fact that you damaged it because it's not replaceable. The guy can't turn around and say, well, I'm only going to give you that couple of 100 Rand or that 1,000 Rand for the motherboard. Obviously, there are different responsibilities if you're renting it, if you're buying it, if you're borrowing it. But in principle, that object has to be useful again. All right. Same as you've got intellectual property issues that if you remove somebody's data, what is that sort of thing worth? The guy might say, no, it's just it's bits and bytes. There's no issue. You know what I mean? And it's not substantial. It's not a tangible damage. Well, do you have to pay for it or not? We learned in the case with Rav Chester. Do you remember wine that was not discernible, that was made tameh, and it looked the same? Data is maybe ethereal. So what's the cause of damage there? So these are things we're going to discuss. But it's just things to talk about and things to consider very carefully. Right. Let's go to the next part of the Mishnah. One is obligated to pay damage only in the cases of properties that are not subject to the law of Me'ilah. Does anybody not know what Me'ilah means?
I'll explain it.
What's Me'ilah, Dom?
Yeah, explain it.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know.
So Me'ilah is not the same as Brit Milah, okay?
Yeah.
So Brit Milah is a circumcision of a covenant, etc. Okay. So before we know the word Me'ilah, we did touch on this in 4a. In 6.4. In 6.4. Do you remember we talked about Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva and temple-based vessels? Yeah. And if you damaged a temple-based vessel, like an ox, that was subject to be sacrificed. So anything that is a temple vessel or subject for Kedusha is called Hekdesh. Hekdesh. It's consecrated. So Hekdesh is consecrated, and Me'ilah is a transgression of using temple-based vessels for mundane use. Okay? So do you remember there was Nebuchadnezzar, and do you remember there was Achashverosh, etc., and they used temple vessels?
Okay.
Do you remember with Daniel the prophet, and he said the writings on the wall? If a non-Jew got the death penalty for using holy temple vessels that are no longer considered, holy, because there's no temple in terms of active use. And when a non-Jew uses it, it renders it impure anyway. He got the death penalty. So even more so for a Jew that uses holy goods for mundane use, he gets the death penalty. There's no question whatsoever if it was done on purpose. If it was done unwittingly, that he used temple property for his own benefit, he must pay the value of the object plus an additional 1/5. And he must bring an asham offering to atone for his sins. Okay? So again, if it's wittingly, death penalty. If it's unwittingly, he must pay the value of the object plus an additional 1/5. That's quite a sum. Because bearing in mind, if he's used it, I don't think it's at a case where he's used it up necessarily. I need to find out if it means he's used, for example, that cow and sacrificed it where he has to replace that cow, and then he has to replace 1/5, or if it's a temple vessel where you give that vessel back, where in fact you've not used it, but you've made use of it, and you do an additional of 1 foot. Because if you're paying that object price plus an additional foot and you're returning the object, it's even more of a penalty. Plus you must bring an asham offering. Okay. So what are we saying is that, do you remember we learned that if I damage property subject to Ma'ila, I'm exempt for discussing it, using the category of kering. Do you remember we learned in Shmot, chapter 21, verse 35, that the damage must be inflicted by the ox of his fellow? Do you remember that? We learned it with Rav Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, where Rav Yishmael goes according to the rabbis and says, listen, it talks about the damage of ox to his fellow. So if he damages his fellow's ox, he has to pay for the damage in kering. But if he damaged an ox consecrated to the temple, you don't have to pay. And Rabbi Akiva said, you do have to pay. And it's only it's the opposite way around. If the temple damages your ox, the temple doesn't have to pay, but you have to pay. So this is obviously going according to Rabbi Akiva, Rav Yishmael and the rabbis, to say that if you damage Me'ilah, that you don't have to pay. This is not about a person using that actual temple property for his own benefit. This is somebody else that damaged that property. So there's a whole discussion of what this is going to entail, and we're going to see there. This is in 6b. I'm just giving you a bit of a refresher. Okay, so what it's saying is hekdesh, consecrated items in Me'ilah. Me'ilah, even though it was used inappropriately, is still hekdesh. It's still consecrated item. And therefore, it doesn't fall within the definition of being included that you have to pay for damage. Does that make sense, guys? That's according to the rabbi. Fine. Now, properties that belong to a member of the covenant, which means if you damage Jewish property, you have to pay. If you pay non-Jewish property of the Gentiles, you don't have to pay. Now, before you all jump on me and say to me, well, are we allowed to just damage their stuff? Of course not. But there are different rules. There are different court systems. The Gentiles have their own court systems. The Jews have their own court systems. I don't know what the procedure would be. It's obviously encouraged if you draw that the rules are you can't speak Lashon Hara about a non-Jew, same as a Jew. So, guys, properties that belong to members of the covenant, for sure you have to pay them. In terms of non-Jews, I don't know how the court system works, how the payment would work, etc., etc. You must bear in mind that the legal process in the Beis Din is different. You need 2 witnesses, whereas in the Gentile court you only need 1 witness. There are a lot of differences in rules. I don't know if the Babylonian Jews, if they damage non-Jew property, would be subject to Babylonian law or not. It's a whole discussion on its own. I just want you to know from here, this is not a license to treat non-Jews in a substandard manner in any way whatsoever. Do you understand what I'm saying? You cannot speak Lashon Hara about people, because if you speak it about non-Jews, you'll get in the habit of speaking about Jewish people that way. And it's just not appropriate. If you're going to, you have to have consistency of behavior in order to be integrous. But we do have a higher obligation for Jewish people than non-Jewish people, such as tzedakah, because if there's a limited amount of funds, then those funds have to be distributed to your brother and sister first, no question. And we all have a limited amount of funds. So properties that belong to members of the covenant, you have to pay for. It excludes Gentiles in this Gemara. And in these circumstances, one is liable for damage done in any place, except for the premises that is reserved exclusively for the damager. So what does that mean? Michael, you've got a gentle dog. I remember. So if your dog comes into my property and I've got an American pit bull and I've got 5 American pit bulls in my property, and your dog comes in there and it rips your dogs to pieces, I'm not responsible for paying because your dog came into my premises. If my dogs came into your premises, I'd be responsible for paying. If our dogs went into a public place, it would be responsible for paying. but not if you come into my premises, which right of admission is reserved. What is your dog doing there? So if your Chihuahua, I love your dog, so let's not use your dog. I'm fond of that creature. But if you had a Chihuahua, battery-operated stick insect, whatever those small dogs are, they look like they run on 2 AA batteries. Those things, they come in my place, and my American pit bull ate your dog. I'm not responsible because it's my property. And on the premises belonging to the damaged party and the damager, say we have land together, Michael, you and I, we share a property, okay? And we share grazing land, etc. And my ox in our joint property eats of your particular cabbage patch. We're going to see the extent of the damage because I am responsible, but we're going to see how that works. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Gavin, in this other case, when one of the damagers does damage, the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land. I remember, so this first Mishnah is talking about liability for carrying damage, okay? And if you remember, we discussed the explanation according to the view of Shmuel and Rav, but in 13b, it's going to discuss it in more depth. Does that make sense? Because we discussed, do you remember the difference between Maveh, between Shmuel and Rav? So we're going to discuss carrying damage between Shmuel and Rav. We already discussed what's considered an ox damage, carrying shine and regal, but we're going to go through it in more detail. And you pay with the choicest of land. So Gavin, you asked good questions about property liens. So we're going to go through all of these things in specific detail. So that's just a brief summary. Now, tomorrow what I want to do is I want to go through the Gemara. I don't want to hit that issue now. We discussed in brief about having a custodian to look after our property and who's responsible for what in terms of the 4 types of custodian: paid custodian, unpaid custodian, rent and borrow. But now we're going to say what happens if you have somebody to guard it that's considered a mental incompetent, which is a deaf, mute, an insane person, and a minor. And we're going to deal with these issues now. How long do we have left?
5 minutes.
5.5 minutes. Okay. So I think we've got enough time just to touch on the issue. I'd appreciate it very much.
Okay.
Okay. So the Gemara cites a brisa that elaborates the opening rule of the Mishnah. The rabbis taught in the brisa, whatever I'm obligated to guard from doing damage, I've caused the damage that does. If I fail to guard it properly, and it talks of a case, how so? So if one owned an ox or a pit, which he handed over to the care of a deaf mute, an insane person, or a minor. So when you have a deaf mute, an insane person, or a minor, these are considered the subcategories of mental incompetence. What do we mean by mental incompetence? We're not trying to be politically incorrect and say they're mentally challenged. Let's just call them what they are. They're incompetent to be responsible for their decisions because they mentally do not have the capacity or the maturity to weigh up the decisions in terms of consequence. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
That's the definition. The only thing that doesn't make sense to me here is a deaf mute. Because a mute is somebody that can't talk, a deaf is somebody that can't hear. I've met deaf mute people that are mentally competent, but I'm assuming here that when it uses the term deaf mute, they never had in those days different categories of chromosome testing for Down syndrome, for chromosome deficiencies of like chromosome 9 and 21, for example. I'm not going to go into different how it manifests in physical damage. But what I can tell you is that some of them have a consequence in terms of affecting other organs, such as communicating or seeing, etc. So the only thing I can think of here is that a deaf mute is coming to imply somebody that also has severe mental retardation. It's not just somebody that can't hear or can't speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Incapable, you mean, not incompetent.
Kev, let's not be politically correct.
Okay.
When we say incompetent, they are. The term of incompetence means you're not capable of fulfilling that task.
Okay.
Today, you can't use that word because with all the lefties, you can't. There's something called fat shaming. Somebody can get to 300 pounds and you can't tell them you're going to get a heart attack and this thing's going to be the end of you. If you continually ate 5 McDonald's burgers a day, and for order for your heart not to take strain and for you to have cholesterol issues and end up on Lipitor and all sorts of damage, and you want to see your feet, maybe seeing your feet is a good indication that you're not overweight. But today you can't say that. You're meant to say every person is beautiful just the way they are. But you know what? We live in a society also of looks. And if somebody's 300 pounds, they're not going to be as eligible for dating as somebody that's healthy. Because we're attracted to physiology, because when people do breed with each other, they breed based on strong genetics. And if one genetics is deficient, like you have 2 different groups of rats, if one rat is slightly a different grade of rat to another, they won't breed. But all of a sudden today, you've got to deal with feelings, etc., without turning around and saying, listen, perhaps if you lose weight, you've got a 20-year longer life expectancy, and you're not going to be short of breath by going around the block. So what I'm saying is, Kevin, we use the term incompetent because they're not capable of weighing up a decision or thinking clearly about consequence. Do you get what I'm saying? So the Gemara uses that term.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, it's on note 20 that these 3 are considered mental incompetence. Thus, they cannot be trusted to take care of things that are entrusted to them. But Kevin, thanks for bringing it up, because the truth of it is, you said it half tongue-in-cheek, because you know that people are very sensitive. And the ox in the pit damaged another person or his property. He, the owner of the damager, is liable to pay for the damage because he was remiss in his responsibility to guard his damager. What's it saying here is that it's your responsibility as a mentally competent person to give it to somebody to guard that is also mentally competent. Otherwise, you have set in motion consequences and a chain reaction based on your failure to examine the guardian properly. Does that make sense? So the owner has not fulfilled his responsibility to guard his property from doing damage by delegating the duty to a mental incompetent. This then is the case to which the Mishnah refers when it states that whatever I'm able to guard, I've caused the damage that it does. So actually, guys, this Mishnah also applies equally to a standard case of an owner who simply fails to guard his damager altogether. But that's an obvious case. So the Gemara always teaches a more novel case. So if somebody obviously just doesn't care and doesn't look after something he was responsible for guarding, he's obviously responsible. That was the issue of the custodian. This is an issue where a custodian chooses another custodian to look after his thing, or he gives it to somebody to look after where he wasn't negligent, but the person was not sufficiently competent. So he did guard his damager to a degree, but by not entrusting it to somebody that was sufficiently competent, it's as if he is fully responsible for the damage. And on that note, we're going to finish. Arthur